Welcome everyone to Developer Dialogue. I'm your host, John, the Strategy Wargamer. I'm joined with my co-host, Eric Tortuga Power, and in our sixth episode, we have two very special guests. We have Iain McNeil, the founder and owner of Slitherine Matrix Games, as well as Marco Minoli, the Marketing Director of Slitherine. Welcome to the show, guys. This is a huge, rare honor. How are you both doing?
Thanks very much. Bit overwhelmed by your interest in talking to us. But no, we're very pleased to be here. Thank you very much.
Real good, Gene. Thank you very much for having us.
So first, let me thank you again for you guys coming on. I know I was saying earlier in the pre-show that I was trying to figure out, I was trying to compare Iain in the strategy gaming universe, trying to do an analogy, and I was trying to think who would he compare with, and I would say Jeff Bezos, the good Jeff Bezos. He's the Jeff Bezos of the strategy gaming industry.
I'm much more handsome though.
Yeah, is there a good Jeff Bezos?
I think there was a year where he was good, and then he went back to Darth Vader kind of thing.
Yeah, Imperial Death March. That makes sense. Iain with the Imperial Death March. Yeah.
I always did like the Starship Trooper uniforms.
That's how we like to interview people. How appropriate. How appropriate you mentioned that.
So I guess before we begin, I wanted to, I'm sure everybody knows, but for the people that are not familiar who founded and run Slitherine, can you give us a quick rundown of what you do at Slitherine Matrix Games? Iain, and then Marco, can you kind of dive into what you do? I think with Marco, we're also going to do a secondary interview because I want to kind of have an interview just on you and Paulo, if that's okay.
That's fine for me. Yeah.
Okay, because I think the whole marketing side deserves its own interview because the stuff that you guys do is just I watch it when you guys on the Twitch stream and I'm like, wow. So I definitely want to have a whole interview just focused on all the work that you guys do and how you coordinate with developers. But so I think this episode we're gonna really focus on Iain, and then I guess the next episode will really focus on you and Paulo. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Good for me.
So yeah, Iain, if you can give us a quick rundown of the job that you do at Slitherine Matrix Games, I'm sure it's kind of enormous.
Well, it's changed a lot as well. So what we are now is very different to what we were when we started. So it's just over 20 years now. Back then, I was a producer at IDOS, working on things like Deus Ex, worked with Muckyfoot, the Base Station Manager, Timeline, a few of those things for IDOS. And I left because one of the games I was working on was a Game Boy Color game called Tyrannosaurus Tex. And the developer I was working with were completely disorganized. And after working at a publisher for a while, I'd realized that I really didn't enjoy it very much. I wanted to be more involved in development. So I left to help this developer make the game. That game, a few weeks after me joining, the guy had a nervous breakdown and disappeared that I was joining. So that team disintegrated. And so I was left then with a company, Slitherine, and nothing in it. And so then I started talking to some of the people I'd been working with before, from my development background before I joined IDOS, and we started up a very small team, one programmer, one artist, and me as the designer, and we made Legion, our first game, which was a very well, it was a small project because we had to try and do something realistic for the size of the team. So it was an Empire level strategy game combined with little real-time battles that you didn't really control, so more of a visual reward. And that's how we started out making Roman themed strategy game. And we got our first game released through Paradox, which was a complicated relationship, which probably best not to go into details about. And then we moved on to Chariots of War, started getting slightly more ambitious with the games, Spartan, Gates of Troy, and then we started moving into a new series, Great Battles series, which was more about controlling the battles. There was less of a campaign and more detail in the battles. And that's when we started to talk to Marco. We became involved with him. Marco was our publisher at the time at Black Bean, and he was signing up the game, which was originally called Legion Arena and then turned into Great Battles Medieval, because Marco brought us a History Channel license. And that's how we started. Everything started getting bigger and growing from there when we started working with Marco. And a few years later, Marco left Black Bean and actually joined us. And we started transitioning from being a very small developer into somebody that was helping other developers to publish their games, and then into a fully fledged publisher ourselves, where we started publishing on PlayStation, Nintendo, I can't remember which platforms we started on, DS I think initially, and the Wii, and then onto all sorts of other platforms, and we started signing other licenses like Horrible Histories. But it was that point when we started working with Marco that we really started to grow from being a small developer into a something bigger, building those relationships with other license holders and things like that. And that the only thing that we had trouble was just as we were becoming a fully fledged publisher, all manufacturing these cartridges and these discs, that's when the retail market fell apart. And so we didn't suffer too badly, but our timing was pretty bad. If we'd been there a couple of years earlier, it would have been a lot of an easier transition than it was for us. But as it was, moving to retail and becoming a publisher was a pretty painful series of events. But Marco actually knows more about that side of things. You were really doing all of the dealing with retail and things like that, Marco. You probably got a much more detailed memory of all those joys.
Yeah. Well, it could note that Ian moved into development because he didn't like working for a publisher, and then ended up being a publisher. But that's funny, quite funny when you think about it.
Yeah, it was working with Westwood Studios. We were making a game for them called June 2000 and June Emperor, and we thought we'd got the game just about perfectly balanced, and then their producers came in and they gave us a new data file which overwrote all of the mechanics of the game, and they said, you must use this, after us spending nearly 2 years making the game. And so that was one of the most frustrating days of my life.
I didn't know that you guys were involved on Dune 2000. That's really interesting. I mean, probably the first strategy game I ever played, well, I guess it's the first real-time strategy most people played, was Dune 2. So that you were somewhere later in the legacy.
Yeah, we were a little bit further down.
Yeah.
We started getting involved with Westwood through Command & Conquer, because I was the UK Command & Conquer champion. I
didn't know that.
Yeah, and we started developing mission discs and things for them. So we did some of the Red Alert. Almost all multiplayer maps from Red Alert were done by us as part of Intelligent Games. But this wasn't as Slitherine. This was before Slitherine. But the technical director and the creative director from Intelligent Games are now our creative director and technical director. So it's most of the same team. And actually, we've got now some of the other artists that we used to work with back then as well. So quite a few of the Intelligent Games team are now working with us at Slitherine. So a lot of the June and June Emperor team are now at Slitherine.
Wow. That's a really incredible story. I look forward to kind of like diving more into that with Marco. But I guess I'll move on to my next question. I'll save that for the next interview. So kind of give people kind of something to look forward to. Regarding Matrix Games, when did that become a part of Slitherine, and why did you guys incorporate that as a company into Slitherine?
So that was, I'm trying to remember now. I think 2009 was when we acquired Matrix Games. So we'd been working with them for probably a couple of years up to that point. And this was after the retail market was dying, and it was becoming clear that digital distribution was a much more reliable and safer method to get to the customer. We didn't realize at that time that it would become so dominant, but we knew there was a definitely potential there, and so we wanted to get more involved. And Matrix's business was entirely digital distribution. They occasionally released a game or two at retail, but it was 99% probably digital. And it just felt like a very good fit for us. So we came to a deal with David Heath and acquired the company off of him back in 2009. And our digital revenues then obviously grew massively, because at that point we were still primarily generating revenue from retail. We did have a digital distribution, but it was probably about 10 to 20%. And so over the next few years, working with the kind of the building blocks we had there, we grew to be pretty much entirely digital revenue now. We occasionally do something at retail, but it's the exception rather than the norm. And so it really transitioned us into the digital space nicely. And we took a lot of the systems and technology they developed and built on those. So it gave us a good kind of jumping off point to kick everything forwards.
So if I understood correctly, you wanted to move into your own area, so you left Eidos or Eidos, however you say it, and at that point you were this was when you were doing development work, right?
At Eidos, I was a producer for Eidos.
Uh-huh.
So that was before Slitherine really existed. So I left Eidos and founded Slitherine with the developer that was making the game that I was a producer for. But within a few weeks, that guy had a nervous breakdown and disappeared to Australia. And so I was then left with a newly formed company with this guy who never actually signed the paperwork. So in the end, we didn't end up with, the idea was we were going to be 50-50 partners in this thing, but he never signed the paperwork and disappeared. And so it ended up that I still had all the shares. So I had 100% of shares of nothing. And so I thought I better do something with this. And so I then started looking around for some way to make a game. And I went back to some of the people I'd worked with before as part of Intelligent Games, people I'd worked on for the Dune series and things like that, and found a couple of people that were interested in coming aboard, and they joined, and we made those first couple of games.
And that would have been like early 2000s, right?
It was 2000, actually July 4th, 2000, that we formed Slitherine.
That's right, because we just celebrated the 20th anniversary, right? Or you guys celebrated the 20th anniversary.
Yes, that's right. And strangely enough, Matrix Games was incorporated within a month or so of that. It was almost the same date.
Oh, I didn't know that. Huh.
Yes. So they're both 20 years old.
Oh, okay. And so now the question I was actually leaning towards is, originally you were getting into this in like some development project, but at this point I think Slitherine is mostly known as a publisher. Is that fair to say, or do you still consider Slitherine a development studio?
No, we do still have some internal resources, but we have more and more transitioned away from making games internally to supporting the developers making games. So we used to have, Phil, who has built the engine for most of our games over the last 15 years, those are what we developed internally, Battle Academy and everything on from there. He now doesn't make any games for us. He provides an engine which we call Archon, which is being used by the Field of Glory team, the Field of Glory
Empires?
Field of Glory Empires games. He was on the Sanctus Reach, the Hell team. They've all used that engine, and I know there's some others. There's a couple of others that we don't have announced yet that he's also providing the engine and support for. So rather than making games directly, we are now providing engines and support for other developers making the games. And the same is true across the art team. We actually have more artists than we've ever had before. We've got about 5 full-time artists now. There's Richard, Pat, Jerry, Kuhn, Jim. I'm trying to think if I've left anyone out. And none of those are working on an internal game. They're all helping developers with their games. Sometimes it's managing outsourcing for them. Sometimes it's doing whatever needs to be done. So it's a mixture of managing outsourcers and providing bits of art for these different games. So for example, Field of Glory doesn't have an artist on it. We provide all of the art between our internal teams and outsourcing. The same for Panzer Corps. The Panzer Corps team has no artists in it. So Flashback Games don't have any artists. We provide everything for that. And there's probably other games that we're doing similar things. We also use a lot of contractors. So Distant Worlds, we're providing the kind of art direction, but also managing lots of contractors for that game. So that's the kind of stuff we do now.
Distant Worlds, that's one of the games I'm most looking forward to. So that's I can't wait.
Excellent.
But this is interesting though. So you went from like development to publishing. I mean, what was your experience like as basically the head of Slitherine? How was that transition for you? Was it something that was an easy transition? Was it like an easy fit for you?
It's tricky because it's actually being a developer working on an individual game is very rewarding. You get such instant feedback. So every now and then I still set up a code base and I can go and tinker with some game ideas. So I have a laptop, and on that every now and then I'll go in and I'll do a bit of kind of coding to make something happen, because you just get that, you do something, you immediately see what the result is. As a publisher, you're much more removed from the process, so you can influence much more, many more things, have a much larger effect, but it's an influence rather than direct control, and so it's definitely a different feeling. And I really do enjoy the direct tinkering, which I no longer really get the chance to do, and it's much more about influencing things, and it's different. I probably do prefer the direct development, but the advantage of being further removed is you get much more variety. When you're on a single game, you're on that game for a year to 2 years, and inevitably it gets a little bit repetitive and samey. You're tinkering with the same thing again and again and again. So you don't get that instant feedback, but you do get that variety. So there's pros and cons, really. I'm not sure. Initially, I'm thinking I preferred the development, but now thinking back, the variety of what I do now is actually really, really interesting. So I probably do enjoy where we are right now, what I'm doing now, more overall. I think, does that answer the question? I've forgotten what the question was.
Yeah, I mean, you answered it. I mean, it's this taking back. I've heard the same thing, by the way, from other people, not even in game development, but in, for example, somebody I know who's pretty high up in Intel. They used to be involved in like the engineering, and now they're, doing the management. It sounds like it's kind of that same thing where they miss getting into the trenches, but it's kind of takes a more mature, maybe personality or a maturing of the person to take that step back and manage from afar. So
it's kind of a necessity. You don't generally plan for it to happen. It's just you end up having too many things to do and you can't do them all. And so you either kind of become a bottleneck on every project where you still want to try and maintain that level of control, but you don't have the man hours to do it. So you end up blocking everybody else, or you have to just accept that you can no longer do that anymore and trust the guys to do their jobs. So it's really important to make sure you're working with people that you trust and that you can pass those tasks off onto. So it can be difficult, and you spend a lot of your time trying to persuade people to do things. So you become a little bit of a diplomat as you're dealing with more and more projects. You've got to convince people, because there's no point. As a publisher, we don't dictate. We don't come in and say, you must do this. This must be blue. This must be green. It's always a conversation, and it's always about persuading the developer so that you can. The team has to share your view. If they don't share your vision and they're not behind it, then the project will fall apart. We've learned this through painful experience. Back when we were transitioning from being that developer to that publisher, there were a few projects where we tried to drive externally the way you would drive something as if it was your project, and they were abject failures. When you dictate to a team and tell them what you want to happen, the team no longer has that vision. And as soon as you let control go and pass it back to them, the project just either stagnates completely because everyone's confused about what they're supposed to do, or it just goes off down the wrong path. And so we learned over, I think, 2 or 3 times we tried to do it that way and it just failed horribly, that it doesn't work. You've got to get the team's buy-in. If the team don't buy in to the vision, you've either got to kill the project or come up with a new vision that everyone can buy into.
Wow. I just want to say that because going back to what you were saying earlier about the that you guys did all the art for Panzer Corps, That's really amazing, and I wanted to say thank you for that because the textures and everything in that game was just absolutely gorgeous. So I just wanted to point that out. I said that I think during my review I was just kind of taken away by the level of detail and just how beautiful it was. So thank you for that.
Well, Pat will be very pleased. Pat's leading the art on Panzer Corps, but the vast majority of that is outsourced because, as you can imagine, there are hundreds of models, and so we work with partners such as, I think it's Saturn that's the main partner on that one. They build all the models and then send them, and then Pat has the joyous job of reviewing all those models and correcting any mistakes for them and sending them back. But that's one of the examples. So the art team on Panzer Corps is probably 10 plus, but we only have a couple of people that do it internally. Most of it's outsourced.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. So one question I always had was, so we have Slitherine, we have Matrix Games, and then I was just kind of curious, how big, in regards to staffing and locations, is Matrix and Slitherine? How many locations do you have, and regarding and also staffing?
That's a complicated question. We have to try and sit down and work it out every time someone asks this because it's changing quite dramatically. So we're growing pretty fast. Office-wise, our largest office is in Epsom in the UK. We have, well, when lockdown started, we had 12 people, but I think we're up to 14. So when we actually do open the office, I'm not sure where everyone's sitting. That's a problem. We'll have 14, 15 in the UK in the office anyway. There's a number of others in the UK, but working remotely. The next largest office is Milan. And Marco, I can't remember. You need to answer that. How many you've got right now?
We've got 8.
And that's primarily the marketing team. Then on top of that, we have a small office in Edmonton in Canada. We have a small office in Romania, Bucharest in Romania. The majority of people work from home remotely. So we've always been a distributed business, partly because of how things have grown up over time. We've kind of sucked in people from various places. So a lot of the people that we've recruited are people we either already knew or fans that we've recruited through the games. And so location-wise, there's never been a central. We haven't been kind of advertising for a job in a certain place. We've been picking up people that we wanted, and we've been taking them the best people we could find wherever they were, rather than trying to find people that wanted a job in a specific location. And so we are quite heavily distributed. We've got people in Australia, Argentina, all over Europe, North America, but I don't think there's a continent that we don't have people on. And so it's kind of 24/7. There's something happening somewhere.
So Slytherine's worldwide now.
Yes.
That's pretty awesome. So anybody listening that wants, that's wondering like, hey, I probably have to move to Europe to get a job at Slitherine. No, you could apply now.
Yep. We pretty much always have the CVs up for certain jobs. So one of the jobs that we find it very hard to recruit for is the producer role. It's a combination. It's a partly technical role, partly project management role, but it requires a strong understanding of the subject matter, and finding people with a mix of those skills in the right subject matter is always a challenge. So finding experienced strategy game producers is probably one of our hardest roles to fill on my side, and Marco's probably got a different view on what's harder to fill from his side.
I think that most of the difficulties come from communication in general. I guess that I think it's now a year that we don't see each other, Ian. It's been a tough time, and although we are kind of modern, and when we started working remotely, people would look at us and say and think, how do you do that? How do you not work within the same office, and now it's very fashionable, and we're we're now we're now very trendy.
Ahead of the curve.
Not because we want it, but you know, it's communication is always something that strikes me as a big issue when you've got this remote work. It's very very good for, you know, day-to-day stuff, but when it comes to sort of planning and ideas and exchange of creativity and doing games, it's a lot about that, right? And then that's where the problem starts.
I was going to say it's been increasingly difficult. So when people have got a clear idea of what they're doing, it's fine. It's when you're dealing with things you haven't dealt before or trying to create new processes, that's where we're finding it's most difficult, and onboarding people as well. So we've actually, I think we added 8 people since October. And so we're growing quite quickly, and that is quite a struggle on lockdown.
I have to ask, maybe even Marco can answer. What's the growth from? Like, what's driving your like onboarding of new people?
Well, there's a little bit of everything, really. We have a growth coming from like organic growth from, you know, the market, the success of the games. We have an ongoing strategy of expanding our audience towards new players, and you see this, right? We've done it with, we started it basically, strongly with Battlestar Galactica 3.5 years ago. Then we had Gladius, which is going very, very strong still. Panzer Corps 2 is another way we're trying to sort of expand the wargaming audience to a bigger, wider pool of players. And we got, a lot more of these, projects unannounced. So that's coming from that as well. Then you have all the pro work and growing dramatically over the last 2 years. So it's a mix of everything, really, and it's the idea that you never stop growing. You really want to create something that's stable and sustainable, but also grows and becomes bigger and wider. We don't like to be standing still, really.
Well, it's good. I'm happy to hear you're growing because, besides being a player of your games, I'm a huge fan of all the stuff you guys are potentially going to be releasing. So it's good to hear that there's enough success to inspire growth. Speaking on that point, I'd actually like to ask about this K program. How's that going for you guys, and what's your experience been with that?
I think we started with the idea of a support, right? And it wasn't really meant to to be just a program where we just hand money out and give support. It's a lot of publishers tend to do this, right? It's just like, it's very ethical, it's corporate, social responsibility that we give something back and just hand some money out to developers. But what we tried to do with the creation of the K Project Fund was really to create a project that's sustainable over time. So the more we sell, the more we can fund, and so it goes, right? So it's a way of supporting, but also creating an economy, also sort of like a side economy for indie projects. And I think that so far so good, I guess. Stirring Abyss and ICBM are doing well. ICBM started a very interesting whole new multiplayer set of challenges, and we have a very active Discord channel. The developer is a guy, just one guy.
Wow.
So it's incredible what they managed to achieve. And that's what I think indie development is. I see a lot of words around, like saying, this game is indie, and then you end up having a 40-50 developers team, fully funded, and that's not indie. Indie is just a few guys, even one guy with an idea and the guts to pursue it. So I think that's what we're trying to do, right? Support this kind of team, support these kind of activities, and I think it's going quite well.
Well, I mean, if I see BM as anything to judge by, that's a diamond in the rough. I mean, that came out of nowhere, and I think everyone is probably, you're being impressed by the sales, hopefully, but it's really surprised a lot of people. I think everyone's enjoying it. Really came out of nowhere.
If I could add, I'm a huge fan of Stirring Abyss. That game is incredible.
Yeah, I think the idea we had was, try and embrace projects with a strong core idea and a strong core, either a gameplay idea or a setting idea or something that just has that is easy to sell and to serve to our audience, right? And I think that was the core message, and I think we've done quite well at that. We receive a lot of applications, I have to say, and we find it that the difficulty is to go beyond being generic. You've got very cute games. You've got some products they look really good, but they don't go beyond this, idea of just being a generic strategy game or generic turn-based World War II strategy game. What we want to try and support is something that's different and takes things from a different angle. And I think that, the both projects we've published so far are, just very much in line with that.
I kind of want to jump to mobile. I guess we can come back to K Project a little later, because I do this has been on my mind for quite a while, and this is kind of the meat of what I wanted to kind of get into. Mobile, regarding iPhone and iPad. Years ago, I remember Slitherine, you guys published Legion on the iPad, and I believe Battle Academy, and multiple other titles. And then everything, I think, slowed down and eventually stopped. And I kind of want to ask, what happened? How? And I know the mobile market changed, but my question to you is, how do you feel that it changed, and is it something worth revisiting?
Well, we started out with, I'm trying to remember what our first mobile games were, but it was when Battle Academy released that we really saw something interesting happening. So when Battle Academy released on mobile, we were selling 10 units on mobile for every one we were selling on PC. And for us, this was huge, because Battle Academy did okay on PC, but nothing amazing. On mobile, it was great. So the iOS version, the iPad version, there was no iPhone version. It was doing very, very well. And we thought, this is great. We've got a new platform where we can sell strategy games. And so we started developing quite a few other games to try and take advantage of that. But what we found was that nothing was able to repeat the success of Battle Academy on iOS. So the other games that released I don't think anything sold more on iOS than it did on PC on everything else we released. And so it was a major disappointment, and we were never able to repeat that success, basically. And over time, we put less effort into mobile conversions because we were not seeing significant sales. The market seemed to be transitioning from the potential for premium games into free-to-play. So Battle Academy hit at a time when premium was still viable, but it was already moving in the direction of free-to-play, and by the time the other releases were coming along, free-to-play was so dominant that it was just not a space you could sell premium games, and our games were not designed for a free-to-play model, and you can't just transition a premium game into a free-to-play model with any kind of degree of success. And so those two things combined meant we reduced the amount we were putting into mobile. And the third thing that really killed it off for us is the way that the hardware works. So with Apple, they'll put out a new version of iOS or a new piece of hardware, and you'll be required to update old apps to work with new hardware. And the biggest issue came, so we were jumping through hoops for that for quite some time. But at one point they decided that we're moving from 32-bit to 64-bit, and every piece of software must be upgraded to 64-bit. And the architecture of our software just didn't allow that. It would have been rewriting the games. And we got such a hard time from customers that didn't understand that we would have to rewrite this game with a team that no longer existed because they were now moving on and doing other things. The cost to us would have been enormous. The gain would have been zero because all you'd have been doing is giving this game out for free to people that had already bought it. The ongoing sales of a game that many years after release was almost zero. And the PR disaster we had because of that was pretty enormous on iOS. And we just didn't want to be trapped in that kind of situation again, where Apple's doing nothing to support us. There was no reason why the apps couldn't run on a 64-bit. They were just flicking a switch to turn them off. And so I'm just passing the buck to us and saying the developer needs to update it. Even the messages that came up saying you need to tell your developer to update this app. And so really, really putting pressure on developers to sort out a problem that Apple could have fixed. So that really, that put us off the whole idea completely. So we've steered clear of it since then. And Marco may have a different view, but at the moment I don't have any plans to go back to it, but if an opportunity comes along, maybe. But right now, it's not particularly appealing because of the being thrown under the bus last time.
One thing I noticed, though, is you guys are releasing titles on the Nintendo Switch. And ever since you guys announced like Battlestar Galactica on the Switch, I've been putting money aside for a Switch because of this. And I'm kind of curious, is this a platform that will see more interest from Slitherine? Like, are you planning to invest more in this platform? Because if so, I literally have to pick it up this holiday season.
Marco's been doing most of the work with the Switch, so probably best if you answer that one.
It's always hard, Gene, because the consoles are not really designed for strategy games. So everything that comes to console is usually a port. So on the back of the success of a game, you end up trying to sort of expand the audience towards with new consoles. So and that's what happened all the time, right? For our games, we've done the PC version, and when the PC version was big enough to have a big enough name that we could use for console releases, then we went for the console release. We never done anything for console straight on. So the same goes for Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica was big on PC. We had good results on I have to say on Xbox and on PS4, and we said why not try Switch? And Switch has a whole lot of different limitations for releasing DLCs and releasing patches, and so it's not fitting well with the way we do things. But we ended up doing it anyway, and I mean I have to say we weren't like super impressed by the results. It may be because the market's not there. Maybe because we are used to selling PC games, so it's much harder to market the games there. But we ended up having a good but not great launch there. Or nevertheless, we will have more Switch games coming on. There's a couple of unannounced Switch ports. So you could I guess you can guess which one of these are, but we're not announcing it. We're not announcing them yet because we're still looking at the technology and seeing what will come out of it. But there's definitely plans to do more.
I guess I'll just pick up a Switch Lite then, not the full one. I'll just get a lighter one. So moving on to since we started discussing a little of Battlestar Galactica, so one thing I wanted to kind of discuss with both of you guys is the IPs. Since a couple years ago, you guys brought over Battlestar Galactica, and as a huge Battlestar Galactica fan, many thanks for this, because I mean I could tell you for like 10-15 years, I always discuss with my friends and be like, hey, it would be amazing, Battlestar Galactica game. And then be like, yeah, it's never going to happen. And then it did, because of you guys. So Thank you for that. So I guess my question is, what inspired you guys to first dabble, to actually go into the IP arena?
Well,
Do you mean the Battlestar Galactica one, or in general IPs?
Well, I guess
we've been doing it for a long time. So the History Channel was our first IP. It's not quite the same thing, but the process is very similar to licensing History Channel as it is to licensing with Battlestar Galactica. So that was one of Marco's specialties back at Black Bean, was finding these licenses and bolting them together with the game. So Marco has always been in that area, and that's one of the things that he's really helped with over the years. But there's quite a few IPs you've done now, Marco.
Yeah, I mean, because when I was, in previous companies, licensing was, was a vital part of my work. We'll always be looking at IPs because they are a mean to expand to new markets, right? So, the biggest example of that is Warhammer. We've got 3 Warhammer active games. We've got more coming, and it is a very good example of how an IP can enhance your sales, not only because it's a cool IP, but because it attracts a whole new audience. So you end up having a solid game that fits with an IP is a perfect mix. And the Battlestar Galactica was exactly that, right? You have a great developer, Black Lab Games. They had a fantastic technology. We released a game based on that technology, and we saw the potential of, listen, but why don't we use this technology but with an IP that would work with it? And Battlestar Galactica was the first choice. The guys were big fans of Battlestar Galactica, and if you were to release that exact same game without a Battlestar Galactica brand, you'd be selling a fraction of it, and you'd be having a harder time in selling it, into marketing it, and attracting attention from the media. But at the moment you say Battlestar Galactica strategy game, then you got a gene coming on and saying, I love it, and I want it, and that's the thing, right? That's the core mechanic behind it. But what we try to do all the time is try to approach every IP like, what is the true essence of the IP? What is it that we want to capture within the game? A lot of IP management in other publishers and things are done is just by sticking a brand on a box or an artwork, and that's done, right? It's my job done. I think what we try to do, although we're targeting a much smaller audience sometimes, we try to really stay true to the core values of these IPs, and sometimes it's not easy. So we really try to work with stuff that works with the strategy elements we have, and I hope it's going to be the same for Starship Troopers. Really,
we've got a few others which we'd love to talk about, which we can't yet. But one of the other things I wanted to mention about the IPs is that they put limitations on you as well as giving you the kind of the universe and the opportunity, and sometimes those limitations can be hard to work with. Other times it forces you to be creative how you do things, and sometimes when you have a blue sky and anything's possible, the game can drift off in various different directions. Sometimes having the license to pull you back and to put those limitations on you, force you to be creative, actually ends up with more interesting game and more interesting mechanics than you would have had if you didn't have those limitations. And it's also something we're very, very used to dealing with, because although it's not an IP, history is kind of an IP. Most of our games are historically accurate strategy games, and history becomes your IP in that situation. It's the Romans, it's the Egyptians. You have that existing knowledge base about those, and you have to stick to it. You have to be authentic. And so we have a lot of experience of doing that already, because if we're not, our fans will tear us apart on the historical accuracy. That's the kind of guys we have. And so we're very used to having to work within those those limitations and taking it across to IP is it's something we're very used to doing. A couple of our developers who haven't done historical games before or not used to working with IPs, they've found it a struggle to have those limitations. They want to do a feature or they want to do this thing. It's like, well, you can't. It doesn't make sense in the world. And so it does sometimes come up as an issue, but the vast majority of times it's just something we're used to dealing with.
That's interesting. So you mentioned history, and that is most of the games I'm familiar with. If they're not in the future, I guess they're mostly history games. And the game most recently that I'm thinking of is Field of Glory Empires, which is from the AJOD team. And what is it like, or what was the experience like bringing on AJOD? How did that even transpire that you guys brought on this? It's a pretty storied team in AJOD. They're well known. I mean,
we actually acquired it from Paradox. So they were Paradox France, I think they were called back in the time. And so we acquired the back catalogue and took on the team from Paradox. They tried to integrate them there, and they were working on some things together, but it didn't quite work out. And initially, for quite a few years, they were using their old engine, but it became apparent that the team as it wasn't large enough to bring that engine forwards. And so that's when we, one of those examples, Phil, our technical director, then provided a new engine for them to bring the games up to a more modern kind of look and feel and generation. And that's what we worked on for a couple of years to build that for them. And now they're working on the next game in that series and the new engine.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it's something that I don't know, you guys can continue to dance around it, but for those people who are playing like these historical games, these strategy games, it's definitely, I mean, the two leading figures in the field are Slitherine and Paradox. So we sit and we do make comparisons. I mean, we sit and we talk, and so how are the new Paradox games out of Slitherine? So I think Field of Glory Empires was a wonderful surprise from that perspective, and that Paradox had a similar release compared to Rome, and I think by most people's opinions, Field of Glory Empires, of course, really made a mark on the community, whereas maybe you can't say the same for the Paradox title.
We were pleased with the comparisons, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting because we were talking with Philippe at some point, and he was saying the same kind of thing. So it's kind of this nice small community where you see people bouncing around from one company to another. You know, people going from Paradox into Slitherine, or, you know, jumping around. And we also have Avalon Digital mixing in with the, you know, I don't know how incestuous the community is, but it seems like there is a little bit of bouncing back and forth.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's a sign that it's growing as well, because it is becoming more of a community and a mini industry where there are multiple companies, and it's healthy for everybody. There's more competition. We're all growing the size of that market, because any one publisher or developer can't really build a community on its own, whereas multiple companies feeding it means that there's always something coming out. There's always news, and so it's healthy for everybody, really.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the more people who get interested in strategy games, it's essentially building the market for everyone else. And I have one other question. I'm going to have to step off here in a moment, but one other question, which usually this is Jean's question, so just to give him credit where credit is due. What brought you, and what also the question for Marco, what brought you into doing gaming at all? Like, what was the career path that you chose, that, or the ambitions you had as a child that directed you to this line of work?
Oh, for me, it's complete chance. So I never had any idea what I wanted to do when I was younger. I went to university and studied environmental science, but one of my roommates was Phil, who was a programmer studying programming and knew exactly what he wanted to do. And before he left university, he had a job lined up at a games company. And after he started working there, we left university. I spent a couple of months lying around, not really doing anything. And then I got a phone call from him saying, we're looking for some testers. Would you like to come and test games? And so I thought, why not? I'll go and do some testing. And so that's when it started, and it's never stopped since then. So I started off as a tester, and I've done pretty much every job that you can possibly do in development or publishing. I've done the sound, I've done artwork, I've done programming, I've done testing, project management, producer, kind of marketing before we had a marketing team. I'm not sure you'd call it, Marco wouldn't call it marketing, but yeah, growing from a small company means that we've had to do every role. So I was completely accidental. It never even occurred to me that people made computer games. I played them, I loved them, but it never even occurred to me you could get a job doing it. So for me, it was all accidental. And Marco, I don't know your story.
I don't think you've done art, Ian, because if you did, then we'd be screwed.
I did some of the art on Legion. I can show you the map tiles I drew.
It was kind of a chance for me as well, but I have to say that it's a different thing. From a marketing perspective, I've always loved niche products. I like niches. I think that they are the best of the best in marketing, because it's still this kind of marketing that makes you meaning analysis, promotion, communication, advertising, everything that is marketing, right? It's when it comes to niches, it's really knowing your customer, knowing what you're doing, knowing what who you're talking to, what their needs are, listening to them. And I have my own passions outside, niche passions outside of the gaming stuff. And still, it's the same, right? I notice, how niche companies do their marketing. So that's what always attracted me in working. Before doing strategy games, I did flight simulators and racing games, and I still loved it. It was very, very nice, because this is what excites me about the marketing job. As in how I joined the industry, it was total chance again, because I was looking for a job. I was 19 years old, and I started as a marketing assistant in a games distribution company. And 2 years later, one of the people I was doing assistance to was left for maternity leave, and she was product manager on Tomb Raider, and I started replacing her for her maternity leave, and I never left product management since, right? Because even what I do now is almost like very much tied into product management. So that's how I started 20 odd years ago.
Oh, thanks so much. So actually, thanks Marco, thanks Ian, thanks Paolo as well. I'll need to step off here, so I'll leave you guys with in the trusty hands of Jean.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Marco, we were probably working indirectly together back then as well. We just didn't know each other because we were both at IDOS.
We were working together. You were a producer, but I don't think we've actually met as in remembering each other. But I remember you presenting stuff.
Oh God, yes. They didn't like me at all. I got put to manage Pyro Studios. They did Praetorians, if you remember that, and I came in as the producer, and I was allocated to the project, and I think I had it for about 2 weeks before I got removed because they wouldn't work with me because I kept giving them feedback. I wanted to be involved in the project. They wanted a producer who was going to rubber stamp everything and just pass it on and do something. And my experience was in internal development for the last 5 years, and so I wanted to try and help steer the game, and that wasn't the role they were looking for from their producer, so they basically fired me.
Wow. So I kind of want to draw back to BSG, and I kind of want to just touch on one thing because you guys, the whole BSG DLC and game has, as you said, been very successful. I've been a massive fan for it. But there's a rumor that I've heard, and maybe you guys can dissuade it. Will we see more BSG titles, or is this the end of this series? Because I believe this Cylon War ended right in I forgot which season we're in. I think 2. Am I correct?
This one's for you, Marco.
Yeah, as of now, the team, the Black Lab Games team has moved to a new project entirely. So they were developing the new project in parallel with the last 3 DLCs, but now the whole team is focused on the new project. So as of now, the Battlestar Galactica series, the Battlestar Galactica Deadlock series is over with season 2 finales. It's over. This doesn't mean we're not gonna go back to the BSG games in the future, but we'll see how that works. But right now, that series is definitely over. As it is, and I guess that we ended it in a way we wanted to end it with a clear link to the TV show, and the idea that the whole Deadlock series is effectively the huge prequel to the TV show, and this how that ties in with the whole lore. The project was super ambitious, and we ended up delivering it. So we're very proud of how it ended.
You guys mentioned earlier that you have a couple more IPs, and my eyes just kind of like jumped up. So I have to ask, as a huge Star Trek fan, and I think like this is like the premier time, because I think Star Trek Discovery came on. Now they have Star Trek Picard, and then Star Trek Lower Decks, and there's a Section 31 series. And so I gotta ask, because Star Trek, I feel like, is in need of a great strategy game. It's been, I think, like over a decade since we had any Star Trek game. Would there be any possibility, like in the future, that might be an IP that you guys might cover?
Every time I come into an interview with Eugenio, I know we're gonna be asked that question at some point.
I'm a big fan of Starfleet battles, but it's not something that's on the immediate horizon.
It's not really. No, we're not working on any Star Trek game right now. And I have to say, I wish we were. The whole series is just. The whole franchise is just perfect for a lot of different things. It's perfect for a 4X game. It's perfect for a tactical game. It's perfect for a strategy product as well. It's just perfect. But we're not working right now. I have to say the Discovery Series 3 has been the best so far, though.
Oh,
I haven't started watching that one yet.
Would you guys? So you guys watched the first 2 seasons already?
Yes. I like to wait till the series is done and then watch it all in one go, though. I can't wait for one episode a week.
Yeah, I feel you on that. It's as soon as it ends, I'm like, oh, great, another week. I gotta wait. So I guess the other IP I wanted to kind of discuss, which was kind of monumental. I mean, I guess this was. I mean, it caught me off guard. I had no idea. And I wouldn't have guessed this in 1,000 years if I had a guess for every day in the week. How did Starship Troopers come about? Like, did you guys just watch the movie and say, hey, this might be something we might be interested? How did that come about? I'm just very curious about this.
We signed Starship Troopers when we saw the rise of a specific kind of game. It started with Dare Billions, as in a type of this new genre of survival strategy, and we saw an opportunity there. Then that genre on its own developed into, I guess, Conan and Conquered and a little and not many other games, but combined that with a little bit of strategy depth, not a lot, and we really saw an opportunity there. So we got in touch with Sony Pictures, and they were super excited coming off the success of BSG. They didn't have any issue at all signing it with us. So we started. I think it's now 3.5 years ago. Then we announced the game 12 months ago, the internet went berserk, basically. So we ended up having this, announcement. And, if you look at Steam right now, this is probably in the top 5 most anticipated strategy games next year. So we ended up going back and say, listen, this is not we're doing something for our niche. The people out there are expecting something different. So we almost kind of went back to the drawing board on some of the game elements, and we're now confident that the games are going to release in the first half of next year. But we really had to redraw a lot of gameplay elements. That's why the game is late, because we now have a much bigger audience to satisfy. So it's going to be interesting how the game will perform.
So 2020 has been a very turbulent year for obvious reasons. We hit the first pandemic in over a century. I'm kind of curious, did you guys see any... I mean, you guys mentioned earlier going to office has changed, but has that affected development in a significant way?
It's had some effect, probably not enormous. There are individual cases, so I don't think, in a general sense, it's not had a huge effect. But there are individual cases where we've had people that have been ill. So, for example, one of the license holders we work with, the main point of contact, had COVID. And so for weeks he was out, and that meant that nothing could be submitted or approved. And so that's led to a 1 to 2 month delay on that project just from that. On another project, one of the developers well, I actually haven't heard news, but last week he was in hospital. So I'm really hoping that there'll be some good news from him this week. So individual cases like that, rather than the shutdown hasn't affected us too much because of the remote working. So it just depends if there's individual situations on specific projects. That's the way it's mostly affecting us. And then the lack of long-term planning. So it's very hard to get together to do the brainstorming and the meetings for the long-term planning. So I don't think we're really seeing the effects of not being able to get together yet. I think we'll start to feel those next year and the year after for what planning hasn't been done properly this year for the next 2 years. So the immediate tasks aren't suffering too much. It's more the big picture structural stuff and organisation and ideas that are probably suffering more. That's my view, Mark. I'm not sure how you're finding it.
I think from a work perspective, the effects of the COVID will be definitely long term. I mean, most people underestimated the psychological effect this will have into people. We already see it. I mean, we've got people working from a 2-bedroom flat with 2 other people in the same room, trying. The whole thing is just having a big impact in everyone's life. So somebody will suffer from it very soon. Somebody will just see the effect later. I don't think that the effects of this can be foreseen in full. This will have a long-term tail that we can't really predict. But yeah, from a financial perspective, and economics are very good. Of course, the gaming industry has been booming. Everyone's seeing this big sales numbers. We are having, of course, the best year ever, and that's another thing. Next year, hopefully this is going to be gone. So there's going to be a financial downside of things as well. So the overall COVID situation, I guess, we'll see what happens in the next 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, the mental health is a good point, actually, Marco, because we actually have had 2 members of staff who've actually completely been off work for significant periods of time just from mental health issues related to COVID. And a lot of other people have clearly not not in the best state. I mean, no one's enjoying it, and depending on how your home situation is and what else you've got going on in your life, it can just be the extra thing to push you across the edge. But that's been very hard from a mental health point of view.
I just have one more question, and I don't want to take up too much more of your guys' precious time. I know you guys have a lot of work, especially with this coming Thursday. I wanted to kind of ask both of you, 10 years out, where do you see strategy gaming, especially with these new technologies that we have, like the Unity, Unreal Engine, or perhaps VR and AR?
My gut feeling is that it won't dramatically change, because you've got all these technologies, VR, AR, all these great things, but they're very good from a visualization point of view. What we don't see is any technology that really gives you that user interface and control to replace the mouse and the keyboard. And unless you can replace those with controls that give you that level of detail that you need for these hardcore strategy games, the visualization being in 3D or VR or AR doesn't really work, because you still need to be sat with these controls to hand. So I think strategy games are going to be limited by the interfaces rather than the visualization tools. And right now, on the horizon, there's nothing obvious that replaces those. So there's quite a lot of interesting tech. So you've got hand controllers and things that are measuring the muscle electrical pulses in the muscle to work out what you're trying to do, and then there's brain interfaces, and these things are all pretty early stages. So to me, I think that we're going to be held back by that. And if you want to carry on playing these deep hardcore strategy games, I suspect it's going to be on a monitor with a mouse and keyboard for the foreseeable future. So I might be wrong, but I think that's what's going to hold us back: user interface.
Yeah, I honestly don't like looking further than maybe 2 years, to be honest. What we develop now is going to be out in 2 years, so definitely in 2 years' time, we're still going to have the same type of game approach. What I think is going to change is distribution for sure. We see this. We don't know what's going to happen with all the streaming services and all the removal of barriers to entry to the market, with everyone able to release anything at any time anywhere. That's a big revolution happening. And this is one of the reasons, Gene, why we tend to avoid projects that have a longer development time than 18 to 24 months, is that this market is so unpredictable that if you try and embark into development projects that are longer than 18 to 24 months, you end up releasing a game in a market that's totally unpredictable when you start developing it, and it's a big risk. So your risk factor increases as the development time increases, and this is all for development, for distribution, for content, for anything that has to do with the actual product. We really want to sort of look a bit closer. I mean, 10 years ahead is probably too long. We'll probably look at what's happening in 2, 3, 4 years, and that's our current horizon, as in product. As in company, of course, we look much further than that.
I think the distribution is an interesting one, because it's becoming easier for people to release their games at the moment, but I suspect that once you have all these game passes and whatever, these systems where you have 100 games for a monthly fee, it's going to put up these big barriers to entry again if people start adopting that and taking them on. If you're not inside that, whatever's being provided by the kind of the platform holder as their core offering, then it could be really hard for smaller indie developers to make any money. So a lot depends on what happens with those things. Monthly fees have not been very popular up to now, but you've got things like Netflix and those kind of services which are really showing that it can work for television, whether it transitions across to games. I don't see why it wouldn't, but it might be a problem if it does.
That was Really great. Thank you guys. That was a really nice insight. And I'm really looking forward to what you guys are do in the next year or two to in response to this. I guess these the Game Pass and all the things that are coming out recently. I mean, if you guys did a monthly thing for like double Game Pass, like $30 a month or $40 a month, I would, I'll be the one that actually puts all that money down. And I'm sure there's tons of other people like me because, for the incredible library of games that you guys have, it's, that's it's a drop in the bucket. Because there's so many great titles going through the Slitherine catalog. I guess that's the biggest problem everybody has going through the Slitherine Matrix site is by the time they go through the whole library of you guys' games, it's probably like a couple of dozen games in the cart already. They're like, all right, I have to narrow this down a little bit.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, the thing about our catalog in general, about our market, is that the games tend to age very slowly. So even games like War in East, is 10 years old. Distant Wars is 10 years old. These games are still a lot of fun and a very and a perfect purchase if you want to dive in.
They're still best in their class. It might be a relatively small niche, but there is nothing that's come along that beats them, and so they just keep on being relevant.
Yeah, it's incredible. Well, I'm not going to take too much. I'm not going to take any more of your time. I know you guys have a lot of work to do, especially with Thursday. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on this show. This means a lot to me to have Iain and Marco on here, and hopefully I get to speak to Marco and Paulo in a week or two. You guys, for everything that you guys do, thank you. I know everybody has the same compliments as me because you guys have given us a lot of joy over the years and made 2020 bearable. So thank you.
That's probably the nicest thing anyone's ever said. Thank you.